Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is part of the second lecture on Descriptive Statistics and Islamic Approach. In this lecture, we will discuss country corruption rankings. These rankings will be discussed in the light of these four questions. Why are we doing these corruption rankings? What do the ranking numbers mean? How are they calculated? And what is the impact of the creation of these corruption rankings? This will summarize material from the paper which is referenced and linked here on this slide. So the first question that arises, how can we assign numbers to corruption? Corruption is a quality, is a state of the heart. It's unmeasurable. There's a long and complicated story which is attached to how this process started, where we started to try to measure things which are not measurable. This process started with the rejection of Christianity in Europe and the adoption of science as a new religion. It became widely believed that science is the only source of reliable knowledge. This led to a rejection of the heart, the spirit, the soul, emotions, and subjectivity as sources of knowledge. There was a strong division made between facts and values, whereas in reality, facts and values are mixed up and they cannot be separated from each other. There is the famous Lord Kelvin's dictum that if you can't measure something, then you don't know what you're talking about. In other words, numbers is equal to knowledge, which may be true about science, but is not true for many dimensions of our human lives. So, first of all, the scientific method was considered to be about measurement, which it is not. There are lots of other aspects of the scientific method. Then this misunderstanding of the scientific method was applied to the construction of social sciences in the early 20th century. And this led to the attempt to measure the unmeasurable, because if you can't measure it, then you don't know what it is. So we pause to consider the question, can corruption be measured? Well, for one thing, if you think about it as a corruption of the hearts, it's qualitative and unmeasurable, and this is mentioned in the Quran. But there are many external manifestations of this hidden, unobservable quality, and one of them is bribes. Bribes can be generally defined as the use of money for persuasion of people to do something which is personally profitable to the briber, even though it has a cost to the society. So even if we take very narrow and mechanical and numerical and quantitative view, this is a multidimensional issue. For example, consider two countries. Country A has 100 corrupt transactions, but each are worth $1 million. This is like the USA. Country B has 1 million corrupt transactions of value of only 100. So which of these countries is more corrupt? Well, one country has very huge financial corruption, but very small numbers, and the other one has large numbers of corrupt transactions with very small quantities. There is no way to answer this question without considering the purpose of ranking. Why do you want to compare these two countries? This question has to be considered with reference to purpose. Without specifying the purpose, any comparison is arbitrary. Either one could come out on top. Sometimes we are forced to measure what's unmeasurable for a number of reasons, which we will see later in the course. If it is necessary, then there are some rules that we should follow. We should try to make sure that it's a one-dimensional thing we are measuring. If there's only one factor, then it can be measured. And if it is quantitative, then it can be easily measured. But if it is qualitative, then there has to be some rule to explain how the qualitative thing is being converted to a number. Similarly, if something is multidimensional, then there is no way to construct one number out of many numbers without introducing values which are take the shape of weights and factors which are considered. So these weights and factors should be made explicit and clear, and we should consider a range of options and consider a range of the users of the statistics in order to remove the appearance of objectivity that these numbers have. And the most important thing is to make sure that we are clear about the purpose for doing the measurement. Now we come to the discussion of the Corruption Perception Index, sometimes called the CPI, which is put out by Transparency International. So how is this number calculated? Well, basically they take a survey of a group of wealthy businessmen, which we don't know who they are, because their identities are hidden, and we ask about their perceptions of corruption in a given country, and this perception is ranked on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is the highest in corruption, 1 is the lowest in corruption. So the question is, how much knowledge do these people have of corruption in different countries, and in particular of relative corruption, how much one country has compared to the other? This we don't know, because we don't know who these people are, but we can have some guesses that if these are wealthy businessmen and they are foreigners, they don't have the right culture, they go into the countries with a limited time and agenda, then it is unlikely that they will get a real understanding of the inner dynamics of that country. They're just an outsider's view, and in particular, their own positions and jobs and intentions matter. If a businessman is in there to try to get something done quickly, and he is not interested in, he is trying to find a way to do this quickly using the lot of wealth that he has, then he is going to encounter corruption, because that is what he is there for. Birds of a feather flock together. Now, if a dishonest and corrupt man goes in, he will find the corrupt people to deal with him to make his job easier. So that doesn't mean that the country is corrupt. It just means that he is seeking out the corrupt. When we analyze the Corruption Perception Index numbers, in this paper we found that there was a 98% correlation with log of GNP per capita. Why the logarithm? Well, GNP is an unbounded number, and CPI is bounded from 1 to 10. So taking the log makes it sort of closer to being bounded. And there are other reasons for the log transformation. But what this 98% correlation says is that basically corruption perception is highly correlated with wealth. In other words, integrity or honesty is the same as wealth. The more wealth you have, the more honest you are. Is this really true? We find that the opposite is often the case. More wealth leads to more greed. You can think of many examples from your own experience, and the Quran also mentions that if we give people wealth, they become corrupt and they do fasad. Actually, corruption is a two-party transaction. Somebody with money gives money to someone who doesn't have money in order to get them to do something that is beneficial to him. So it's a famous story that when you have a raid on a brothel, you lock up the prostitutes, but you don't lock up the politicians. So this kind of thing, the corruption, we only look at one end of the picture, we don't look at the other end. If you look at lobbying in the USA, the use of money to pursue selfish interests at social cost, all of this can be considered as a form of corruption. And in that case, the amount of money and the influence of it on society and the damage done to society is huge. There is an example of Senator Thousand, who passed the Medicare prescription drug bill using dirty tactics. And in this bill, it is said that the Medicare will buy from Big Pharma at whatever prices they say, without negotiating and without seeking competition from alternative sources. So after he got this bill passed, which many people calculated is like a $80 billion gift to the pharmaceutical industry, he resigned from the Congress and took a $2 million job with the pharmaceutical industry. But this is not corruption. If we try to look into why these numbers, what is the purpose of this ranking, we find a very interesting and story. Post-World War II, there was a competition between the capitalist and communist models of development. The World Bank developed capitalist models, one of which is the Structural Adjustment Program, which was a roadmap for development using free market techniques. This program has not a single instance of success. No one country became developed using their methods. whereas many other countries have developed using methods quite opposite to the World Bank. The East Asian miracle is an example. So the failure of the capitalist model is widely documented and acknowledged even by the World Bank. So the question was, especially in the 90s, why did this model fail? So in order to prevent people from trying to go outside the capitalist model, the blame was put on the countries which were following the free market model rather than the free market model itself. So why doesn't the structural adjustment work? Well, because the countries have bad governance and corruption, not because the World Bank program itself is a terrible program. So it's is the standard methodology of blame the victim. So what is the impact of this corruption perception index? Theoretically, if we look at a country which has a high corruption perception index, then that should create efforts to improve. Practically, it has the opposite effect. There is solid research which establishes that how people behave depends on how they perceive public behavior. If I go into an environment which according to my impression is highly corrupt, then I'm likely to behave in a corrupt manner. I just, when in Rome, do as Romans do. If I think I am in a place which is very honest and very has high levels of integrity, my perception, not the reality, then I will also behave very honestly. So if there is a CPI publication which says that your country is very corrupt, then everybody will start behaving more corruptly. So the way to produce better integrity is to highlight examples of honesty and integrity. If there are 100 transactions and 99 of them are corrupt and one of them is honest, then the newspaper should carry the report of that honest transaction, and that will encourage people and they will create the perception of honesty and integrity, which will create further honesty and integrity. So the usual methodology of creating a national accountability bureau and anti-corruption drives, these are counterproductive because they tend to highlight corruption, and that will breed even more corruption. It will not have the effect of stopping corruption. So some final words. The colonization of the globe was done by the European countries, and it was justified by racist assumptions, racist arguments that white man is infinitely superior to all other races and therefore they have the right to rule. The colonization process was so brutal and ruthless that the records have been suppressed from the history and wiped from the memory. Today, colonization continues by financial means. Poor countries are given loans and then they make billions of dollars of interest payments to the rich. Today, the money is flowing from the poor countries to the rich countries, exactly like it was in the times of colonization. So just like justification was needed in those olden times, so justification for this exploitation of the poor countries is needed in the modern times, and this is what corruption indices provide. They say that the poor countries are corrupt and that's why they deserve to be exploited.